أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجلا يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. فما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني ظل في ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين فما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. By the grace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tonight marks the blessed occasion of the birth of our 10th Imam of the Ahlul Bayt, Ali ibn Mohammad Al-Hadi al-Naqi alayhi الصلاة والسلام. It's the 5th of the holy month of Rajab. This is a blessed month in the religion of Islam. It marks the births of several of the Imams of our Ahlul Bayt, Imam Ali Al-Hadi, Imam Muhammad Al-Jawad, and the greatest of all, the first Imam, the brother and successor of the Holy Prophet, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi الصلاة والسلام. Allahumma salli ala. Inshallah, let us use this month to reflect upon each and every one of their lives and try and model our own lives based upon their example. Let us also use this month to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His dhikr, through a'mal, inshallah. Let us use this month to avoid evil, temptations, sinful desires, which inshallah will be the primary focus of tonight's discussion. Now, first and foremost, when it comes to resisting evil temptations, we have to acknowledge that we as human beings are weak and vulnerable. This is just the reality. We have certain weak desires which exist within us, and when they are channeled in the wrong direction, they can lead us towards the hellfire. Things like anger, greed, hatred, bitterness, jealousy, lust, envy, whatever it is. Now, just picture in your mind a flame, a small flame. If you place your hand near the flame, it can keep you warm. But if you get too close, it burns your hand. It's the same thing with our desires. If we don't keep a distance from it, if we know exactly where to stop, we can use them to the utmost level. We can ensure that we have the right control over them. However, if we get too close, if we give in to them, they can overwhelm us and burn us just like that flame. And this is exactly what the shaitan wants. He wants our sins to overcome us, but instead we have to try and overcome the shaitan. Now this requires, as we mentioned before, acknowledgement of our weaknesses as human beings. It also requires self-reflection on our part, reflecting on our lives day by day, every week, every month, asking ourselves how we're living our lives, what our behavior involves, our actions, our manners, our very thoughts, reflecting upon all of these things deeply and identifying where weaknesses exist so that we can overcome them. It also requires a level of accountability, holding yourself to account when it comes to these things and having the willpower to improve, striving towards improvement. When you set a target, you can't just leave it at that. You have to work towards that in order to achieve it. So inshallah, we can try to do exactly that. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The other important thing is to ensure that we have the right kind of association with people. We associate with the right kind of people. So those who encourage us towards good deeds and discourage that which is wrong, that which is bad. Of course, Amr bil Ma'ruf, Nahi anil Munkar. These are two of our furuh ad-din, two of the branches of our faith. And they are also mentioned in the Holy Quran. When we associate with the right kinds of people who enjoin us towards the best behavior and help us abstain from that which is wrong, it helps us improve to a great extent. And the same in reverse. When we help someone improve, when you, for example, when you help someone improve, when you encourage someone in the right direction, it helps you improve as well. That's just the truth, it's a reality. So inshallah, let us do exactly that, improve on an individual level, but also together, grow together, inshallah ta'ala. With that, I would like to conclude and invite His Eminence, Sheikh Hamid Waqar, to deliver the main lecture for tonight. Please welcome him with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم محمد والأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. As always, an honor and a privilege. As Brother Hussein mentioned, we've entered the month of Rajab. And this is one of the months that we need to hold dear, and it's an important month for us. It's a month where we should be striving to improve our spirituality and preparing ourselves through Rajab and Sha'aban and the first few weeks of the month of Ramadan to enter into Laylatul Qadr. So now is the time of the year where we really need to hold tight to our religion and strive. Right, so the topic of today of trying to resist evil temptations is definitely a good topic for this period of time. Now the month of Rajab itself, it's a month, as again Brother Hussein mentioned, to celebrate the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Many birthdays in this month. Imam Mohammad Waqar alayhi salam, I think, was forgotten in the list that was provided, and all the other Imams as well. Imam Hadi, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam Jawad. Also, the birth of Bibi Sakina is in this month. Mab'ath happened in this month. And there's all kinds of other celebrations that we can, inshallah, benefit from. Right? Imam Ali alayhi salam said the month of Ramadan is the month of Allah. The month of Sha'aban is the month of Rasulullah. And the month of Rajab is my month. So it's the month of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And as the lovers of Imam Ali, we should hold this month dear. And we should do what we can to get closer to God in it. So there's a couple things that we could do. 3 things I'll mention that we should concentrate, and then I'll get onto the topic. First one is forgiveness. The month of Rajab is a month of forgiveness. So we've committed sins. We weren't successful in resisting the temptations of shaitan, right? And we need to repent for these sins, right? Let's cleanse our heart, purify our souls, so we could enter this month and the next months that are coming with a pure heart, inshallah. Imam Baqir alayhi salam says, "Ata'ibu min adh-dhanb kaman la dhanba lah." The person who repents for a sin is as one who hasn't committed a sin. Right? So it's a powerful words there. Right? So all of us have made mistakes. I would assume none of us are where we want to be spirituality, in a sense of spirituality right now. We want to be higher. We want to be closer to God. Right? We wish we didn't make the mistakes that we've made, but we have time to repent and change. So let's use it. Another thing that's highly recommended is giving charity in this month, right? So purifying ourselves through helping others. And third one is fasting, right? So purifying ourselves from sin through repentance, purifying ourselves through charity, and purifying ourselves through fasting. Imam Kazim alayhi salam has said, Rajab is the name of a river in paradise that is whiter than milk and sweeter than honey. Allah will allow one to drink from this river if he fasts at least one day in the month. Right, so if we want to, inshallah, in the day of, in paradise, drink from this river called Rajab, we need to fast at least one day, right? He had continued, it's also a month of seeking forgiveness, which we mentioned, as Allah is forgiving and merciful during this month, and obviously not only in this month, but especially in this month, right? Okay. So when we're looking at the topic at hand, which is to try to resist the temptations of shaitan, right? And we're trying to do that in order to get closer to God. So we don't commit sins which will bring us farther away from Him, right? The whole purpose of resisting temptations is so we don't fall into sin, right? Imam Khomeini, when he looks at any of these akhlaqi traits, he always mentions 2 things. One side of the coin is our cognition, our contemplation, right? Trying to change the way we approach religion, or at least remind ourselves of the way we should be approaching religion. And then the second step, or the other side of the coin, is practical, tools that we could use to overcome a negative akhlaqi trait, to adopt a positive one. And here we're talking about overcoming a negative one, which is committing sins, basically, right? So with the cognition side, or the contemplation side, there's a few verses of Quran that I usually like to refer to, right? And just reading these verses, contemplating about them, right, will help us kind of formulate that mindset that we should have in regards to temptations, right? And it's none of these verses will be new to you. You hear these verses over and over again. But sometimes we need to really remind ourselves. So that means when we are tempted, right, when we're tempted to commit a sin, and we try to refrain and we try to take a step back, we could recall these verses. Maybe we could have them written down somewhere that we could read them and we could refer to them, right? And also, these are verses that you could refer to on a nightly basis, on a weekly basis, whenever. Even if you're not being tempted by sin, you refer to the verses so when you are tempted, they come to your mind, right? So That's one of the things we could do. Now it's just a few verses, 6 verses. We'll read them, and then we'll move on to look at other things. So first one, Allah states, وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهَ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. Right, which you've all heard many times. They plan, and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners. Right, and how does that relate to temptations of shaitan? Shaitan is planning to destroy us. Right? And shaitan's army that consists of men and jinn, right? Human beings and jinn. They want to take us away from God. Right? They make sin look like it's something we should do. That if we're not engaging in the sin, then we're missing out in life. Or we're losing some kind of opportunity that we should be getting. Right? And these are things that, we face on Fridays when I give speeches here. We've been talking about khums. Not paying khums obviously is a sin. Right? A lot of people will ridicule people who pay khums. They'll say, how could you, you're paying taxes. Why are you paying khums as well? What is this? God doesn't need your money. The Imam doesn't need your money. What are you talking about? Right? And people refrain from paying khums because of this. Right? This is one example. Right? Where, the plan of Allah is that we pay this money. We pay this khums. Right? Second verse. Allah bi dhikri Allah tasma'innu al-qulub. Look, pay attention, right? The hearts find rest in the remembrance of Allah. It's a big one, right? Because a lot of times sin, why are we sinning? For pleasure, for short-lived happiness, right? We're committing a sin to engage in a pleasurable activity that will last for a short period of time, right? People are looking for this everlasting pleasure, right, which they misinterpret for peace. But the only way to get true peace, the only way for our hearts to truly be, in a state of tranquility is through remembering God. Right? It's through the remembrance of Allah. And that's another verse that helps me when I'm being tempted. Right? I could say, all right, if I want that tranquility, I'll have to refrain from this sin. Right? Even though maybe this sin looks attractive to me right now, but if I want that tranquility, I want that peace of mind, that peace of heart, I got to stay away. Right? Third one. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu asta'inu bis-sabri was-salat inna Allah ma'as-sabirin. Right? O you who have faith, take recourse in patience and prayer. Seek help and aid through patience and prayer. Indeed, Allah loves the patient. Right? So when you're tempted with sin, you need patience in that moment. Right? And this is a verse that's encouraging us towards patience and saying that Allah will be with the one who's patient, with those of you who have faith and are patient. Right? And these are the verses that shape our understanding of how we should approach religion here, right? And how we should approach sin. Next one. Inna ma'al usri yusra. Verily, with hardship is ease. Right? And being tempted from sin and not engaging in the sin is difficult. It's not easy. If it was easy, it wouldn't be something special to stay away from sin. Right? If it was easy not to sin, then there'd be no reward in it. Sin has to be attractive. It has to try to grab us and take us in its direction for us to deserve some kind of reward if we refrain from it. Right? It's very important for us to realize that and recognize it's difficult. There's hardship there, by staying away from sin. It's not easy, it's hard. But if we do it, Allah will lead us to ease, inshallah. Next one, fifth one. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for us and an excellent wakil or trustee. Right? So again, when you're thinking of sin, right, just thinking about God, saying that God's sufficient for us, hopefully helps us to refrain from that sin. Right? All right. So those are the verses that we look at. Now, obviously, it's not as easy as just that. If it was that easy, where all we have to do is remember these 5 verses, by remembering these 5 verses we'll never commit sin, then all of us would be, mashallah, the most closest people to God. Right? It's not that easy. Although when we do, the more we recite these verses and the more we try to become accustomed to them, the more effect they'll have on us in those times of need. But a lot of times when we are tempted to sin, the last thing we're thinking about is verses of the Quran. Right? A lot of times when we're in that moment where sin is right in front of us and it's pulling us in that direction, that's not the time when we're remembering these verses. So we have to try to look at the other side of the coin that Imam Khomeini mentioned, which was the practical aspect. And that practical aspect, right, there's a couple things, right? One of them is trying to refrain from being in the situations where we would be tempted from sin. So it's trying to protect ourselves from entering into temptation, right? Obviously, we can't do that 100% of the time. No matter how much we try, there will be some temptation towards sin. But we can refrain from many of the temptations, right? So, why can't we, for instance, go to parties where there's all kinds of alcohol and drugs and all kinds of sin happening, right? The reason is because the likelihood of us falling into sin is greater because there's all kinds of temptations there, right? Why are we supposed to stay away from, or, for instance, stay away from places where music is being played, maybe, or whatever the case is? Whatever the sin that you struggle with, right, one of the best things to do is stay away from the areas or the situations that will incite that temptation, right? When you look at addiction, right, people who struggle with addiction, one of the things that they teach them, right, people who are trying to overcome their addiction, is to stay away from all the places where you've done drugs, right? So if you used to do drugs at a certain friend's house, don't go to that house. If you used to do drugs in a certain alley or in a certain park, don't go to that park, don't go to that alley. Because when you enter into those situations, your urges and your temptation will be stronger, right? So try to protect yourself from those urges and temptations by refraining from putting yourself in that situation. So that's one. Second one is distraction, right? So sometimes we might not be in a place that, is a negative environment. We might be at home, alone in our room, and we might be tempted towards sin, right? In that case, distraction, right? Try to figure out something that we could put our mind on other than the sin. If it's, watching a movie, if it's playing a video game, if it's calling a friend, if it's leaving your room and just hanging out in the living room, right, with your family, if it's taking a walk, whatever it is, whatever could distract your mind from the temptation of the sin is something you should be thinking about doing, right? So first thing, try to remember those verses of God that try to adapt the way that you think about religion and sinning in general. And second, try to refrain from the situations where the temptations for you are strong. And third is just trying to distract yourself by anything. Right? Anything obviously that's halal. Right? Don't distract yourself from committing a sin by committing a different sin. But anything that's halal, distract yourself, whatever it is. Right? And that way you take your mind off that sin, you don't commit it, and then you move on with your day. Okay? Now, doing this is not easy. Right? It sounds easy. For me to say it to you sounds easy. But when you're alone with yourself and you're trying to fight off these temptations, it's hard. Right? Or sometimes when you're in a group and all the people you're with, they're trying to lead you towards sin, as Brother Hussein was saying. Sometimes standing up in those situations is difficult. Right? It takes a struggle. And what's the Arabic word for struggle? Jihad. Right? So the same word that's used for war is used for this fight against our own self. Right? The struggle against shaitan is the major jihad. Right? It's the jihad, and the word jihad is used to denote the difficulty that's the difficulty of trying to reject shaitan, and also the importance of it. Right? Because jihad is something that was praised. Actual war was praised in the beginning stages of Islam. Right? It's something that was a huge honor to fight alongside the Prophet to become shaheed. And that same word was used for fighting against yourself. Even very strong traditions. Right? Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, "Amlaku anfusakum bidawami jihadaha." Possess yourselves through continuous struggle against it. Right? So if you're not struggling against yourself, you lose possession of yourself. You lose control. Right? And the society takes control. Shaitan takes control. You're no longer able to protect yourself from sin. Right? So Imam Ali alayhi salam is encouraging us constantly towards this jihad against ourselves. Right? Another one, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, paradise is purchased through jihad and nafs. How do we purchase paradise? Obviously not through money, but through this struggle. Therefore, one who is engaged in jihad and nafs will be victorious. The self is the greatest reward for one who really appreciates their worth. Right? When you realize that fighting against shaitan and protecting your self-worth is valuable, right? And it leads to your closeness with God and your increase in existence even, right? That's when you adopt this mentality, right? And obviously the famous tradition that compares fighting in war against fighting with yourself, right? So there's a tradition where the Prophet dispatched some soldiers to fight in a battle, and they went and they fought. They were victorious. They overcame the enemy, and then they came back and returned to the Prophet, returned to Medina, right? And the Prophet addresses them and says, congratulations, right? He says, tabrik to them. Congratulations. You have successfully completed Jihad al-Asghar, the minor jihad, right? But you've yet to engage yourselves in Jihad al-Akbar, the greatest jihad. Now imagine being in that army, or not even being one of the soldiers, just being the people on the streets who heard the Prophet address the soldiers this way. Right? As I said, these soldiers were looked at as heroes. Right? These are people protecting the newly formed Islamic government. who's led by the Prophet of God. Right? This is a huge and important task. And rightfully so, they're praised. Right? But the Prophet says, you've done the minor jihad, not the major jihad. So they ask him, what is this major jihad? O Prophet of Allah, what is jihad al-akbar? And he says, jihadun nafs, the struggle against yourself, the struggle against shaitan. Now, think about war in today's time, right? With guns, and even there's not guns, people are just pressing buttons on computers and missiles are being shot out, right? Still, it's ugly. There's death and destruction. It's hard. It's not easy. People come back from war and they have PTSD. It breaks them mentally, right? But think about war way back then, when there weren't any guns. People had swords and they had to fight in close quarters with one another, right? And you've seen movies, but you could imagine being, a small place with a whole bunch of soldiers with swords in their hands, swiping at each other, swinging at each other, right? How dangerous and scary would that be? How difficult would it be to throw yourself into that situation? You say you might say, yeah, of course I'd do it, but look into your heart when you're really there. Would you do that? Right? Would you gladly just jump into that situation? Probably not. Right? There would be fear there at least. And compare doing that, striving and struggling in that way, the Prophet says that's small. That's minor. It's harder to fight against yourself. Right? So I'm not saying it's easy. Right? But it's something that in this month of Rajab, and inshallah through Sha'ban in the month of Ramadan as well, it's something we could concentrate on. Right? Let's look at the sins we're performing, the sins that we're engaging in on, possibly even a daily basis. And let's think, is this something I really want in my life? Do I want to be pleasing shaitan every day of my existence and upsetting God? Right? Is this what I want for myself? Or do I want to make a change? Do I want to step away from this sin? Right? And we discussed the ways to do that. Remember those verses of Quran? Try to stay away from the situations as much as you can that increase your temptation, and try to distract yourself when the temptations come. And inshallah, with that, we'll all be successful. And inshallah, you guys pray for me, and we'll pray for everyone to protect ourselves from shaitan, and we ask Allah to protect us from shaitan, inshallah. With that, we'll close and open up for question and answers with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Hamid, as always, for that deep and insightful presentation on jihad, struggling against ourselves, overcoming our desires through that struggle. One verse in particular that stood to mind was Inna ma'al usri yusra. Verily, with hardship comes ease. It actually brings to mind a common saying on cigarette packets. It says smoking is hard, but not smoking is hard, but smoking is harder, something like this. So essentially, it's difficult to give up that temptation to smoke, but it's more difficult if you continue smoking and you end up destroying your own life and you're sitting on a sick bed for I don't know how long. It's just something that came to mind because it's the exact same thing with sin. It's easy to give in, it's harder to resist, but in the long run, it's going to destroy you in that same way. So inshallah ta'ala, we can remember that and find comfort in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I believe the question and answers, are they ready now or still being passed around? That's all right. We can begin with what we have and then continue with all the rest. Please recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Just like to welcome Brother Abbas to conduct the Q&A session. Please welcome him with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. To kick off today's Q&A session, so I'm going to try to keep it as brief as I can. Our first question is, if a person is living in this modern era in terms of vulgarity and sinfulness, where it's so easy to fall into sin, and if we stay away from it, will we get more ajr, rewards, as in compared to a person who's living in an Eastern society?
So, just to reiterate the question, someone who's living in the Western society where there's more temptation to sin and refraining from it, would they get more rewards than someone living in a society where there's less temptation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Potentially, right? So I can't give a blanket answer and say yes in every case, right? But if the temptation is very strong and you resist it, right, you get more rewards than if a temptation is not there or is very minor, right? So, but that temptation might come to different people in different ways, right? So let's say, I don't know, temptation towards a certain sin, right? With two people standing next to each other, like the girls are upstairs, so I could say, like imagine like a girl walks by, right? Maybe for one of you, it's easy to lower your eyes, and it's easy not to look at her. It's easy. There's no issue whatsoever. You're not tempted, right? But for someone else standing next to you, they might be very tempted. And for them to refrain, they get more rewards than for you, because it was easy for you, it was hard for them, right? But that's the same situation. It's just certain sins. Some people are inclined towards certain sins, and other people are inclined towards other sins, right? So it really depends on the individual and not necessarily the society, right? So, but it's a good question, but the key is refraining. The stronger the temptation is, the more reward for resisting it is.
Great answer. Our second question is, what is your concept of modern and progressive societies? Can a person be modern and progressive by observing his religious duties?
Yes, like just observing religious duties does not make someone archaic, right? Or prevent them from being modern or progressive, right? Obviously, I don't know how you would define progressive, but just our religion doesn't prevent us from engaging in the society, doesn't prevent us from studying pretty much any field at university and entering into any occupation, right? So not any occupation, I guess like casinos, for instance, or something, but the majority of things that the majority of occupations, the society in general, our religion doesn't prevent us from engaging in it. Sometimes it's us who try to look at our religion in a different way that makes us, that prevents us in certain ways, but no, our religion wouldn't prevent us from being modern or progressive by itself.
And our third question is, can Jihad al-Akbar be seen as a kind of prerequisite to Jihad al-Asghar, in the sense that one may need a strong and refined character to fight on and struggle, regardless of how difficult a battle may seem? For example, those who fled Uhud or refrained from helping Imam Hussein or refrain from helping Imam Hussein and Karbala may be seen as having a weak character who didn't properly struggle against their soul?
So, not necessarily, right? Because in the hadith that we read, the Prophet said that you've performed Jihad al-Asghar, but you haven't performed Jihad al-Akbar. So that means the Jihad al-Akbar is not a prerequisite for Jihad al-Asghar, right? But in order to get, all of the rewards and all of the benefits of fighting in the Islamic army, right? In Jihad al-Asghar, for instance, during the time of the Prophet, you would have had to have worked on yourself, right? So you would have had to have been on a high spiritual station in order to reap the maximum amount of rewards that you could through that act of worship, just like any other act of worship, right? So the prayer of someone who has gone through Jihad al-Akbar and who has struggled against themselves and who has reached high levels of spirituality, their prayer is worth more and they benefit more from that prayer than someone who hasn't done that, right? So the higher you are in spirituality, the more you benefit from acts of worship, Jihad al-Asghar being an example of an act of worship. But it's not a prerequisite. You can't say that, if you haven't done Jihad al-Akbar, don't pray. Or your prayer is not looked at as prayer. No, it still is. It's still prayer, but the more you work on yourself, the more you get out of it.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions? Yes? Do we? No? Okay. I'd like to invite Brother Hussein back again for the next segment. Salawat.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. One point just before finishing Sheikh's answer with regards to, what was it? One who finds it easier to avoid a sin, to be tempted, and one who finds it more difficult. It actually brings to mind something I was thinking of before. When you keep dwelling in sin constantly, it's like you're going further and further into deep water, and you find that when you do that, the waves start hitting you, start crashing around you. It's more difficult to escape. When you constantly engage in sin, it's more difficult to escape from that sin. But if you avoid once, it's easier the next time, and so on and so forth. So inshallah, let us develop the habit of refraining on a consistent basis, and in doing so, refine and purify our characters. And with that last point, inshallah, we'll conclude tonight. I'd like to invite Brother Jahangir to recite the ziyarat, and inshallah, we'll conclude. Please recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام